June 19, 1944, along the forested edges of the Vosges Mountains in eastern France. A heavy morning mist clung to the trees as Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson of the 379th Infantry Regiment crouched low beneath the undergrowth, watching German patrol movements through Army-issued binoculars. The segregated African-American unit, part of the 92nd Infantry Division, had been assigned reconnaissance duties that most commanders believed would keep them safely away from direct combat. Johnson and his men expected routine observation work with minimal enemy contact. They could not have known that within 48 hours, their actions would confound an entire German battalion and fundamentally alter military deception tactics for the remainder of the European campaign. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable account of how one soldier's ingenuity and cultural knowledge, dismissed by his own military leadership, would create a psychological warfare breakthrough that military strategists would study for decades to come. The morning air felt thick and cool against Johnson's skin as he lowered the binoculars and signaled for his squad to gather around. 6 men moved silently through the underbrush: Privates William Carter, James Robinson, Thomas Jackson, Corporal Henry Davis, and Sergeant Robert Lewis. Each man had been handpicked by Johnson for their specialized skills, though the United States Army had given them precious few opportunities to demonstrate those abilities in actual combat scenarios. "German patrol just completed their rounds," Johnson whispered. 12 men, standard configuration. "They'll be back in approximately 4 hours based on their previous patterns. That gives us our window." Private Carter, a former engineering student from Howard University before the draft notice arrived, spread a crudely drawn map across the forest floor. "If intelligence is correct, Supply Depot should be 2 kilometers northeast from our position. Munitions, fuel, rations, all waiting for their reinforcements pushing toward Allied positions. Brass just wants confirmation of location and approximate inventory," Corporal Davis said, his voice carrying the flat drawl of rural Georgia. "No engagement, no heroics." Johnson nodded slowly, but the men recognized the expression that crossed his features, the same look he had shown during their deployment in Italy when ordered to maintain defensive positions while white units advanced. It was the look of a man calculating something beyond his orders. "I grew up tracking deer through Louisiana swamps with my grandfather," Johnson said after a moment of consideration. "Old man knew every trick for moving without being seen or heard, including ones passed down from his father, who escaped slavery through those same swamps." The men exchanged glances. Despite serving together for 14 months across 2 theaters of war, personal histories remained largely unshared, as if the weight of their present circumstances rendered the past temporarily irrelevant. "One technique in particular," Johnson continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "used to call it ghost walking, when you want something to follow your trail but never find you." Private Robinson, who had worked as a clerk at the Treasury Department before enlistment, raised an eyebrow. "Sarge, orders are for observation only." "And we'll observe," Johnson replied. "But we're 7 men against an entire enemy installation. If we're compromised, we're dead. I'd prefer adding some additional insurance to our mission parameters." Sergeant Lewis, Johnson's second-in-command and a former math teacher from Philadelphia, studied the map with critical eyes. "What exactly are you proposing, Marcus?" Johnson's plan was simultaneously simple and complex, a deception technique his grandfather had taught him for hunting in swamplands. While tracking their primary mission objective, they would create a parallel reconnaissance path using reversed footprints, walking backward but making the prints appear as if someone was moving in the opposite direction. "Germans will see evidence of American scouts," Johnson explained, "but the trail will lead nowhere useful while we complete our actual mission. If they discover any signs of our presence, they'll follow phantom trails while we extract with the intelligence." The technique required methodical precision. Special rubber overshoes would be worn by 2 team members responsible for creating the false trails. These shoes, improvised from rubber materials salvaged from damaged equipment, featured tread patterns carved to resemble standard-issue army boots, but oriented in the reverse direction. The wearer would walk backward, creating footprints that appeared to travel in the opposite direction of their actual movement. "It's not just about the footprints," Johnson explained. "It's about crafting an entire false narrative. Broken twigs at precise heights, disturbed vegetation, even minute soil displacement, all calibrated to suggest American reconnaissance, heading toward empty sectors while we gather the intelligence command needs." Carter looked skeptical. "With all due respect, Sarge, the Germans have some of the most experienced trackers in Europe. You really think we can fool them with hunting tricks?" Johnson's expression remained impassive. "European tracking relies heavily on assumptions about how humans navigate terrain. My grandfather's techniques were developed specifically to confound conventional tracking wisdom. Different cultural knowledge creates different blind spots." The men discussed the plan for 20 additional minutes, identifying potential weaknesses and contingencies. Johnson assigned specific roles based on each man's demonstrated aptitudes rather than their official military specializations, a practice that had earned him both the loyalty of his men and the suspicion of his commanding officers. At 0800 hours, Operation Backward Step commenced. The first phase involved standard reconnaissance procedures. Corporal Davis and Private Jackson established a forward observation post overlooking the suspected supply depot location, while the remainder of the squad created the elaborate deception network Johnson had outlined. The depot itself was larger than intelligence had suggested. Nestled within a natural depression in the landscape and covered by camouflage netting, the facility housed approximately 30 transport vehicles, several hundred fuel drums, and munitions crates stamped with markings indicating artillery shells of 105 and 150 millimeter calibers. Most significantly, the team identified 3 Tiger tanks undergoing maintenance, precious German armor, that would likely be deployed against Allied advances within 72 hours. Johnson documented everything with methodical precision, using the compact Kodak 35mm camera issued for reconnaissance missions. Each photograph was accompanied by detailed written observations in a waterproof notebook, including approximate quantities, conditions of equipment, and personnel rotations. Meanwhile, Privates Carter and Robinson executed the deception strategy. Using the modified overshoes, they established 5 distinct false trails leading away from the actual reconnaissance route. Each trail contained subtle markers that would appear legitimate to trained observers: disturbed vegetation, occasional boot prints in soft soil, even manufactured evidence of hasty meals or brief rests. "The key," Johnson had explained during planning, "is calculated imperfection. Perfect trails raise suspicion. We want them to find exactly what they expect to find: American soldiers moving clumsily through unfamiliar terrain." By midday, the reconnaissance portion of the mission was complete. Johnson's team had compiled comprehensive documentation of the supply depot, including personnel schedules, defensive positions, and inventory assessments. The parallel deception operation had established multiple false trails extending in various directions away from their actual route. Under normal protocols, the squad would now begin immediate extraction to deliver the intelligence to command. Johnson, however, had authorized an additional phase. Intelligence this valuable will trigger an immediate German security response, he explained to his men as they regrouped in a densely wooded ravine 400 meters from the depot perimeter. Standard procedure would be to withdraw along our established exfiltration route, but that creates a single failure point. If they manage to identify our actual path, they'll have us before we reach friendly lines. Instead, Johnson outlined an elaboration of their deception strategy, one that transformed a simple misdirection into a comprehensive psychological operation. Private Jackson, who had worked as a stagehand in Harlem theaters before the war, was tasked with creating a series of subtle but detectable American presence indicators at strategic locations surrounding the German supply depot. These included manufactured evidence of observation posts, food wrappers with English text deliberately left visible, and even a discarded uniform button bearing United States military insignia. "We're creating ghosts," Johnson told his men. "Multiple American reconnaissance elements appearing to converge on their position from different directions. Their security resources will be divided, attempting to track and eliminate non-existent threats, creating our window for actual extraction." Sergeant Lewis raised the most significant concern. If they believe they're surrounded by American reconnaissance, won't they simply accelerate their timetable? Move those tanks and supplies before our forces can target them? Johnson nodded. That's why timing is critical. We complete the deception elements, transmit our coordinates for artillery targeting using the SCR-300, then extract. By the time they realize the nature of our operation, the depot will be under Allied bombardment. The plan represented a significant deviation from their assigned mission parameters, which specified intelligence gathering only, with no provisions for facilitating direct action. Johnson's initiative reflected a growing frustration among many African American officers and non-commissioned officers serving in segregated units, their capabilities consistently underestimated, their tactical innovations dismissed by the military hierarchy. By 1400 hours, the deception network was complete. 6 distinct false trails had been established, each containing evidence of American reconnaissance activities conducted at different times. The cumulative effect suggested a coordinated intelligence operation involving multiple American units converging on the German facility. Private Carter maintained a methodical record of each false trail, noting its characteristics and intended psychological impact. Trail 1 suggests a 3-man team moving northeast, appearing to have departed approximately 18 hours ago, he documented. Indicators include partial boot prints, discarded K-ration packaging, and deliberately broken undergrowth at American shoulder height. As the afternoon progressed, the first evidence emerged that their deception was functioning as intended. German security patrols increased in frequency, with team configurations suggesting search patterns rather than standard perimeter defense. Johnson observed through binoculars as German soldiers examined disturbed vegetation along one of the manufactured trails, their body language indicating growing concern. "They've found Trail 3, Johnson whispered to Lewis, "right on schedule." The German response intensified over the next 2 hours. Additional security personnel were diverted from the depot to expand search operations. Radio communications intercepted by Private Robinson, who had studied German language at university, indicated escalating concerns about potential Allied interest in the facility. By 1700 hours, the squad had documented all required intelligence objectives and completed the deception infrastructure. Johnson made the decision to begin extraction, but with a final enhancement to their operation. Rather than withdrawing along a single route, the team would separate into 3 elements, each following a predetermined path designed to intersect 15 kilometers southwest at a designated recovery point within American-controlled territory. Each element maintains separate documentation of the intelligence, Johnson instructed. If any team is compromised, the remaining elements can still deliver the critical information. This redundancy strategy represented another departure from standard operating procedures, which typically prioritized unit cohesion during extraction. Johnson's approach reflected his understanding that for his men, African American soldiers in a segregated army, mission failure carried implications beyond normal military consequences. Their competence and courage were perpetually subject to heightened scrutiny and diminished expectation. As the squad prepared for separation and extraction, a sudden increase in German activity demanded their immediate withdrawal. A mechanized patrol comprising 2 Kubelwagen vehicles and 12 infantry soldiers appeared to have discovered one of their genuine observation positions. "Move now," Johnson ordered. "Contingency plan, Charlie." The squad dispersed according to their prearranged protocol. Johnson, with Privates Carter and Jackson, would take the primary route carrying the photographic evidence. Sergeant Lewis would lead Corporal Davis and Private Robinson along a secondary path with the written documentation and hand-drawn maps. Each team carried a portion of the deception materials to continue deploying during their withdrawal. Johnson's team moved silently through dense underbrush, employing indigenous concealment techniques rarely taught in military training. Rather than minimizing their movement through undergrowth, the standard European approach, they utilized controlled disturbance patterns that mimicked natural animal progression through the environment. Grandfather called it moving like water through reeds. Johnson had explained during training sessions back in England, "You don't avoid disturbance, You make your disturbance indistinguishable from the forest's natural rhythms. The immediate extraction proceeded without direct enemy contact, though German search parties remained active throughout the area. By nightfall, Johnson's element had covered approximately 7 kilometers, maintaining their deliberate pace while continuing to establish false indicators along divergent paths. As darkness enveloped the forest, Johnson's team established a temporary position to await moonrise. The night sky remained overcast, limiting visibility and necessitating brief periods of stationary observation. During one such pause, Johnson shared something unexpected with the two privates. "This technique, the backward walking, the ghost trails, it wasn't just for hunting," he said quietly. "My grandfather learned it from his father, who escaped from a plantation in Louisiana in 1857, used these exact methods to confound slave hunters for 11 days while making his way north." Carter and Jackson remained silent, absorbing the significance of this revelation. Their current military operation, employing techniques developed by enslaved Americans seeking freedom, now turned against German forces who embraced ideologies of racial supremacy mirroring those their ancestors had faced. "History has a way of coming full circle," Carter finally responded. By midnight, the overcast conditions had intensified, bringing light precipitation that complicated navigation but provided additional auditory concealment. The team continued their methodical progress, employing techniques adapted for nighttime movement, maintaining physical contact through rope connections between team members, using natural terrain features for orientation, rather than relying solely on compass headings. The precipitation transitioned to steady rainfall by 0200 hours, significantly reducing visibility but increasing the effectiveness of their deception strategy. The rain would preserve certain evidence of their false trails while degrading indications of their actual movement. Precisely the dynamic Johnson had anticipated when selecting this particular extraction approach. "Rain turns ordinary trackers back," Johnson had once explained during training, "but it makes truly skilled ones even more dangerous. It reveals patterns invisible in dry conditions." Through the remaining night hours, the team maintained their disciplined pace, covering approximately 5 additional kilometers before dawn. As morning light gradually penetrated the forest canopy, they established a concealed observation position to assess potential pursuit. The first German patrol appeared at 0730 hours, a 6-man team moving along one of the false trails Johnson's squad had created the previous day. The Germans displayed textbook tracking techniques, methodically examining ground sign and vegetation disturbance. Their movement followed precisely the phantom path, designed to draw them away from the Americans' actual position. "They're following Trail 2, Jackson whispered, observing through binoculars. "Heading northeast, away from both our current position and the rally point." Johnson nodded, a grim satisfaction evident in his expression. "They'll continue pursuit for at least 4 hours before recognizing the inconsistencies." The team maintained their observation position for 40 additional minutes, documenting German search patterns and communication procedures. This intelligence, while not part of their primary mission, would prove valuable for future operations in the sector. By mid-morning, they resumed movement toward the designated rally point, now approximately 3 kilometers distant. The continued rainfall provided both concealment advantages and physical challenges, as trails became increasingly muddy and treacherous. At 1100 hours, Johnson's element arrived at the rally point, a natural clearing adjacent to a small tributary of the Moselle River. Sergeant Lewis's team had arrived approximately 30 minutes earlier, having encountered minimal German activity along their extraction route. "They've committed at least 60 personnel to search operations," Lewis reported, "multiple teams moving along the false trails, exactly as you predicted. Their command appears genuinely concerned about possible Allied reconnaissance in the sector." Johnson's expression remained impassive, though the validation of his tactical approach was evident to his men. "Did you transmit the targeting coordinates?" Lewis nodded. 0845, artillery confirmed receipt. Time on target scheduled for 1500 hours today. The consolidated squad continued movement toward American lines, now approximately 5 kilometers distant. The terrain gradually transitioned from dense forest to more open agricultural areas, necessitating adjustments to their movement techniques. They traveled along irrigation ditches and natural depressions in the landscape, occasionally employing the reversed footprint technique when crossing exposed soil that might reveal their passage. By 1300 hours, the team established visual contact with American forward positions near the village of Rambovillas. Johnson initiated the recognition signal protocol, a specific pattern of cloth movements designed to identify friendly forces approaching from contested territory. After confirmation from American security elements, Johnson's squad crossed into friendly territory at 1320 hours, successfully completing their primary mission with all personnel intact. The intelligence they delivered exceeded command expectations in both detail and strategic value. The documented presence of Tiger tanks at the supply depot represented particularly critical information, as these armored units could potentially disrupt planned Allied advances in the sector. Captain Thomas Miller, intelligence officer for the regimental command, received Johnson's report with evident surprise at its comprehensiveness. This level of detail typically requires multiple reconnaissance insertions, he noted, while examining the photographic evidence. How did your squad manage to gather this much intelligence without detection? Johnson maintained formal military protocol during the debriefing, making no reference to the indigenous techniques or cultural knowledge that had informed his tactical approach. We employed standard reconnaissance procedures, sir, with emphasis on minimal signature presence. The captain's skeptical expression suggested he recognized the inadequacy of this explanation, but chose not to pursue the matter further. Well, whatever methods you employed, the results are exceptional. Artillery is preparing to target the depot based on your coordinates. Johnson and his men received no immediate commendation for their achievement. They were instructed to rest and re-equip, with the understanding that similar missions would follow. The standard narrative of African American units, performing support functions rather than contributing directly to combat operations, remained officially unchanged. As Johnson's squad settled into their designated rest area, significantly separate from the accommodations provided to white units, Private Carter approached his sergeant with a question that had clearly occupied his thoughts throughout their extraction. Those deception techniques worked perfectly, exactly as you said they would, Carter observed. Command should be documenting this. It could save lives if implemented more broadly. Johnson's expression revealed the complex reality they operated within, soldiers fighting simultaneously against both a foreign enemy and the limitations imposed by their own military hierarchy. Some knowledge remains more effective when it isn't widely recognized, Johnson responded after careful consideration. Our ancestors understood that maintaining certain capabilities outside official doctrine sometimes serves a greater purpose. The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of artillery fire, the scheduled bombardment of the German supply depot commencing precisely at 1500 hours. The squad listened in silence as the orchestrated destruction of their target proceeded, each man contemplating the invisible contribution they had made to the Allied war effort. Unbeknownst to Johnson and his men, their deception operation had created effects beyond the immediate tactical situation. German command had indeed identified evidence of American reconnaissance activity surrounding the supply depot, but the contradictory nature of the tracks and indicators had provoked a more significant response than anticipated. Intercepted German communications, decrypted by Allied intelligence, revealed that regional German command had become convinced that a major American operation was imminent in the sector. The perceived presence of multiple American reconnaissance teams, approaching from different directions, suggested preparation for a significant assault, potentially involving airborne elements. As a result, German reinforcements originally designated for deployment to Normandy were temporarily diverted to the Vosges region. 300 infantry, 2 artillery batteries, and most significantly, a company of mechanized units that would otherwise have opposed Allied advances along the coast. This strategic impact remained unknown to Johnson's squad as they prepared for their next mission. The official after-action report classified their operation as a standard reconnaissance with unusually comprehensive results. No mention was made of the indigenous techniques, cultural knowledge, or tactical innovations they had employed. Yet among themselves, The men recognized the significance of what they had accomplished. Their success validated approaches and knowledge traditionally dismissed by conventional military doctrine, techniques born from necessity among people who had developed methods of survival and resistance outside the boundaries of official recognition. As evening settled over their encampment, Johnson gathered his squad for a brief assessment before their next deployment. "Command is impressed with our results," he informed them, though not necessarily curious about our methods. The men exchanged knowing glances, a shared understanding that transcended the need for explicit acknowledgement. "For the next operation," Johnson continued, "we'll refine the ghost trail technique. Sergeant Lewis has suggested some enhancements based on our observations of German response patterns. Private Jackson, who had maintained the most detailed documentation of their deception infrastructure, produced a small notebook with modified diagrams. I've been thinking about how to create false timing indicators, making them believe tracks were left at specific times to further complicate their analysis." The squad spent the next hour in detailed tactical discussion, each man contributing refinements based on their observations during the operation. This collaborative approach, drawing on diverse perspectives and experiences, represented another departure from standard military hierarchy. As darkness enveloped their position, the distant rumble of artillery continued to echo across the landscape. The supply depot they had reconnoitered was now under sustained bombardment, its strategic value neutralized thanks to intelligence they had delivered without a single shot fired. Johnson's final words to his men that evening contained both acknowledgement of their achievement and recognition of the broader context within which they operated. "What we've accomplished won't appear in any official history. The techniques we've employed won't be taught at military academies, but every German soldier chasing our ghost trails is one less soldier facing our advancing forces. Sometimes the greatest contribution happens in the spaces between official recognition." None of them could have anticipated that within 48 hours, the backward footprint technique would face its most significant test, as German command dispatched specialized tracking units specifically to locate and eliminate the phantom American reconnaissance elements that had seemingly infiltrated their territory from multiple directions simultaneously. What began as a tactical deception was about to evolve into one of the most unusual psychological operations of the European theater. A ghost story written in reversed footprints that would ultimately influence Allied deception doctrine for the remainder of the war. Dawn broke with unusual clarity on June 21, 1944, the summer solstice casting long shadows across the encampment where Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson and his squad prepared for their second mission. The artillery bombardment of the German supply depot had continued through the night, its effectiveness confirmed by reconnaissance aircraft, reporting multiple secondary explosions, indicating successful targeting of munitions and fuel reserves. Johnson's intelligence had proven accurate in every detail, though official acknowledgement remained minimal. A brief commendation noted in the daily operational summary, with no specific mention of the innovative techniques that had ensured the mission's success. Captain Miller approached Johnson as the squad performed equipment checks, his expression suggesting information beyond routine assignment. "Your target's been thoroughly neutralized," Miller began, unfolding a map across the hood of a nearby jeep. 80% destruction of stored supplies, 2 of the 3 Tiger tanks disabled beyond field repair. Johnson nodded without visible emotion, though the validation of their work registered clearly. "Glad to hear it. Sir, has our next reconnaissance objective been identified?" "That's why I'm here," Miller replied, his tone shifting subtly. "Something unusual has developed in the sector. German communication traffic has increased by 300% in the last 18 hours. They've diverted significant resources from other areas, including specialized units we haven't previously encountered in this region." The captain's finger traced a circular pattern on the map encompassing the area of Johnson's previous operation. "They appear to be conducting an extensive search operation, multiple units converging from different directions, communication protocols suggesting high priority." Johnson maintained his professional demeanor, though the implications were immediately clear. Their deception strategy had provoked a reaction far beyond tactical response. It had escalated to operational level concern within German command. Any indication of what specifically they're searching for, sir? Johnson inquired, careful to avoid revealing his awareness of the likely cause. Intelligence assessment suggests they believe significant Allied reconnaissance is active throughout the sector, possibly preparing for a major offensive. Miller studied Johnson's face carefully. Curious thing is, aside from your squad, we've had minimal penetration in that area, yet the Germans are behaving as if they're surrounded by American observation teams. Johnson absorbed this information with careful neutrality. Perhaps they're demonstrating excessive caution, sir. Perhaps, Miller acknowledged, clearly unconvinced. Whatever the reason, it presents an opportunity. With German attention fixated on phantom threats in this sector, actual Allied advancement preparations facing reduced opposition, Three Valleys East. Command wants to capitalize on this unexpected advantage. The implications crystallized in Johnson's mind immediately. Their deception operation had inadvertently created strategic opportunities beyond their tactical objectives. Your squad's new assignment, Miller continued, is to reinforce whatever has the Germans so spooked. Return to the same general area, maintain the appearance of reconnaissance activity, keep them chasing shadows while we prepare the actual advance. 3 days of distraction is all we need. Johnson recognized the significance of this assignment, from standard reconnaissance to active deception operations, a rare acknowledgement of capability, typically reserved for specialized units. Understood, sir. When do we deploy? 1600 hours today. Full briefing in 1 hour. Miller hesitated, then added with evident curiosity, whatever you did out there has them thoroughly rattled. Care to enlighten me on your methods? Johnson considered his response carefully, weighing operational security against the potential value of sharing indigenous knowledge that had proven so effective. Standard reconnaissance procedures, sir, with some adaptations based on tracking techniques I learned growing up in Louisiana. Miller's expression suggested he recognized the deliberate understatement, but chose not to pursue the matter further. Well, whatever adaptations you employed, Command would like to see more of the same. Keep those Germans chasing ghosts. As Miller departed, Johnson gathered his squad for immediate planning. The men assembled quickly, their expressions reflecting both pride in their previous success and awareness of the escalated stakes their methods had created. Our deception worked better than anticipated, Johnson informed them, outlining the German response and their new mission parameters. They've committed significant resources to locating reconnaissance elements that don't exist. Sergeant Lewis, ever the pragmatist, identified the primary challenge immediately. They'll have specialized tracking units this time, possibly even dogs. Our previous techniques will need enhancement. Private Carter nodded in agreement. Standard backward walking won't be sufficient against dedicated tracking teams. We'll need to create more sophisticated deception infrastructure. The squad spent the next 40 minutes in detailed tactical discussion, each man contributing refinements based on their particular expertise. The resulting plan represented a significant evolution of their previous approach, no longer simply creating false trails, but establishing an elaborate network of phantom American presence throughout the sector. Private Robinson, who had served as the squad's primary communications specialist, suggested the most ambitious enhancement. We could create false radio traffic, limited transmissions, just enough to suggest American units coordinating movements. The proposal represented significant risk. Active radio transmission could potentially reveal their actual positions, but the potential impact on German perceptions justified the calculated exposure. Johnson approved the approach with specific limitations on transmission duration and frequency. Their expanded deception strategy incorporated multiple elements. First, the creation of diversionary physical evidence suggesting American reconnaissance teams operating throughout the sector. This included the backward footprint technique that had proven so effective during their previous mission, now enhanced with additional elements to confuse tracking dogs, including minute quantities of fuel oil applied to selected areas to mask human scent. Second, the establishment of false observation posts with subtle indicators of recent American presence, opened K-ration containers, discarded cigarette butts with American markings, and even artificial footprints created using rubber molds designed to match different boot sizes, suggesting multiple American units. Third, a limited signals deception component involving brief encrypted radio transmissions at scheduled intervals, designed to create the impression of coordinated American reconnaissance reporting to command elements. The comprehensive deception infrastructure would suggest an American intelligence operation of unprecedented scale. Multiple teams conducting coordinated reconnaissance throughout the sector, presumably in preparation for a major offensive. By 1500 hours, the squad had completed preparations and received final mission briefing. Their insertion would occur at dusk, with extraction scheduled for 72 hours later, assuming they could maintain the deception without discovery for the required duration. Captain Miller conducted the final briefing personally, emphasizing the strategic significance of their assignment. Intelligence indicates that German command is already diverting resources from other sectors in response to perceived American reconnaissance activity. Your mission is to reinforce that perception, creating the impression of extensive Allied intelligence gathering throughout the region. As darkness approached, Johnson addressed his men one final time before deployment. What we're attempting goes beyond standard military doctrine. We're creating a ghost story that will occupy the full attention of German command for the next 72 hours. Each of you knows your role. Execute with precision, maintain communication discipline, and remember, we're not just 7 men. For the next 3 days, we're an entire Phantom battalion. The squad departed American lines at 2000 hours, moving northeast under cover of darkness. Their route deliberately avoided the areas of their previous operation, where German search activity remained concentrated. Instead, they would establish their deception infrastructure in adjacent sectors, creating the impression of American reconnaissance, expanding its operational footprint. The initial insertion proceeded without enemy contact. By midnight, the squad had penetrated approximately 8 kilometers beyond the fluid front lines, entering a region of mixed forest and agricultural land that provided both concealment opportunities and the soft soil conditions ideal for their deception techniques. Johnson divided the squad into 3 elements, each responsible for establishing distinct components of their Phantom presence. Sergeant Lewis led Privates Carter and Jackson in creating the physical deception infrastructure, false trails, artificial observation posts, and manufactured evidence of American activity. Corporal Davis and Private Robinson managed the signals deception component, establishing positions for brief encrypted transmissions at predetermined intervals. Johnson himself, accompanied by Private Jackson, conducted actual reconnaissance of German positions in the sector, gathering legitimate intelligence that would substantiate their deception operation if they successfully extracted. The 3 elements operated independently throughout the night, converging at a designated rally point shortly before dawn. Johnson had established strict protocols for these reunifications, including specific recognition signals and approach routes designed to minimize the risk of compromise. By daybreak on June 22nd, the first phase of their deception infrastructure was in place. Artificial trails suggested American reconnaissance teams operating in 6 distinct sectors, all apparently converging toward key German defensive positions. False observation posts had been established at strategic vantage points, each containing subtle evidence of recent American presence. The signals deception component remained inactive during daylight hours, scheduled to commence with brief transmissions after nightfall. The squad established a concealed position in dense forest, approximately 2 kilometers south of a secondary road used for German supply movements. From this location, they could monitor German response to their deception while maintaining secure communications among their own elements. The first evidence of German reaction appeared at approximately 0900 hours. A specialized tracking unit comprising 8 soldiers with 2 German shepherd dogs moving methodically along one of their manufactured trails. Johnson observed their movements through binoculars, noting the methodical approach and specialized equipment. "Dedicated tracking unit," he whispered to Lewis. "Not standard infantry. Note the modified equipment, specialized for extended tracking operations." Lewis studied the German team through his own binoculars. "Dogs will complicate matters. Our scent masking needs to be effective. The tracking unit followed the false trail for approximately 40 minutes before the dogs appeared to lose the scent at precisely the location where Johnson's team had implemented their scent masking techniques. The German handlers spent considerable time attempting to reacquire the trail before finally proceeding in the direction suggested by the artificial footprints Johnson's team had created using their rubber molds. "They're following exactly the path we intended," Lewis observed, "heading toward false observation post 3, where they'll find evidence suggesting Americans were present approximately 36 hours ago." Johnson nodded with quiet satisfaction. By the time they complete analysis of that location, the next false trail will suggest the Americans moved northwest toward their supply route. Throughout the day, German search activities intensified across the sector. Johnson's team documented 4 distinct tracking units operating in their area of operations, each following elements of their deception infrastructure. Most significantly, 2 motorized infantry companies were observed establishing blocking positions along potential extraction routes, clear evidence that German command had committed substantial resources to locating and intercepting the phantom American reconnaissance they believed was operating in the region. By late afternoon, the strategic impact of their deception was becoming evident. German communications intercepted by Private Robinson indicated that reinforcements originally designated for positions facing the actual planned Allied advance had been redirected to this sector. The diversion of these resources, precisely as Allied command had hoped, would significantly reduce opposition to the actual offensive scheduled to commence in 72 hours. As darkness descended, the squad initiated the second phase of their operation, the signals deception component. From carefully selected positions, Private Robinson transmitted brief encrypted messages at scheduled intervals, creating the impression of multiple American teams reporting observational data to command elements. The transmissions were deliberately kept short, under 15 seconds, to minimize the risk of German direction-finding capabilities identifying their locations. The expanded deception infrastructure created the impression of an American reconnaissance operation of unprecedented scale. At least 20 distinct teams operating throughout a 30-square-kilometer area, all apparently gathering intelligence in preparation for a major offensive. German response escalated accordingly. By midnight, Johnson's team had documented the arrival of additional security forces, approximately 2 infantry companies with supporting armor elements, all diverted from other sectors to locate and eliminate the phantom American presence. The second day of their operation, June 23rd, brought increased challenges as German search activities intensified and became more systematic. Additional tracking units arrived in the sector, including specialists Johnson identified as being from dedicated counterintelligence formations rarely encountered near the front lines. "They've brought in their elite trackers," Johnson observed as they monitored a new German unit, employing distinctive search patterns. "Those aren't regular army. Specialized training, probably forestry or hunting backgrounds." Lewis studied the German team through binoculars. "Their technique is different, more methodical, less reliance on dogs, greater attention to minute details." The escalation represented both validation of their deception's effectiveness and increased risk to their operation. Johnson adjusted their approach accordingly, implementing more sophisticated counter-tracking techniques drawn from his grandfather's teachings. "We need to create contradiction and confusion," Johnson instructed his men. "Multiple conflicting indicators. Evidence suggesting American teams doubling back on their own trails. False chronological markers that make timeline analysis impossible." The squad spent the daylight hours enhancing their deception infrastructure while carefully avoiding direct observation. They created additional false trails with deliberate inconsistencies designed to provoke disagreement among German tracking specialists. Private Carter, applying engineering principles to their deception, developed a system for creating footprints that appeared to change depth and pattern midway through a sequence, suggesting American teams attempting their own counter-tracking techniques. By mid-afternoon, evidence of confusion within German search operations became apparent. Different tracking teams could be observed following contradictory indicators, sometimes crossing paths, while pursuing different interpretations of the manufactured evidence. Radio communications intercepted by Robinson suggested disagreement among German specialists regarding the number and nature of American units supposedly operating in the area. They're arguing about basic facts, Robinson reported after monitoring German communications. One assessment claims 15 to 20 Americans moving in coordinated teams. Another suggests as many as 50 operating independently. A third report indicates possible airborne insertion based on pattern analysis. The chaos created by their deception had exceeded Johnson's expectations. What began as a simple technique, walking backward to create misleading footprints, had evolved into a comprehensive psychological operation that now occupied the full attention of an entire German battalion battle group. By nightfall, German command appeared to have implemented a new strategy in response to their inability to locate the phantom Americans. Rather than continuing ineffective tracking efforts, they established an elaborate cordon around the entire sector, checkpoints on all roads, patrols along likely movement corridors, and ambush positions at potential observation locations. This development created significant challenges for Johnson's squad. Their planned extraction route in 72 hours would now require penetrating this security cordon, a far more dangerous prospect than their original extraction plan had anticipated. Johnson gathered his team for reassessment as darkness provided temporary concealment from German observation. "They've committed even more resources than we anticipated," he informed them, outlining the security cordon now surrounding their operational area. "Our deception worked almost too well." The squad discussed options for approximately 30 minutes before Johnson made his decision. Rather than attempting to extract through the reinforced German security perimeter, they would implement an even more audacious deception, creating the impression that the phantom American reconnaissance teams were withdrawing in a different direction entirely, drawing German attention and resources away from their actual extraction route. "We'll make them believe the Americans are attempting to extract northeast," Johnson explained, indicating a route that led away from Allied lines. "They'll commit resources to intercept units that don't exist, creating our window for actual extraction to the southwest." The third day of their operation, June 24th, involved implementing this final deception phase while continuing to gather actual intelligence on German positions and movements in the sector. The genuine reconnaissance data they collected would prove invaluable to Allied command, providing detailed documentation of German defensive reorganization in response to their phantom threat. Private Robinson, monitoring German communications, reported increasing frustration among enemy command elements. "They've been searching for 72 hours without making a single confirmed contact. Their senior officers are demanding explanations for the failure to locate any actual American personnel, despite extensive evidence of their presence." The psychological impact of their deception extended beyond tactical confusion. It had begun affecting German morale and command cohesion. Intercepted communications indicated growing tension between field units, conducting fruitless searches, and headquarters demanding results. By mid-afternoon, Johnson's team had completed preparations for their extraction. The final deception elements suggested American reconnaissance withdrawing northeast, with manufactured evidence indicating hasty departure under pressure. Simultaneously, they had identified a potential extraction route southwest through a drainage culvert beneath a secondary road now used for German supply movements. As twilight approached, Johnson gathered his squad for final instructions before commencing extraction. "We've accomplished our primary objective," he informed them. "German resources have been diverted from the actual Allied advance corridor for the full 72 hours requested. Now we extract with the intelligence we've gathered." The extraction began at 2100 hours, with the squad moving in standard infiltration formation, 5-meter intervals, communication by hand signals only, noise discipline at maximum level. They proceeded southwest toward the identified drainage culvert, employing every concealment technique in their collective knowledge. Approximately 400 meters from the culvert, they encountered the first evidence of the German security cordon, a 2-man observation post monitoring the approach to the drainage system. Johnson halted the squad and assessed the situation through infrared binoculars. 2 personnel, standard infantry, Regular 15-minute radio check-in based on previous observation, Johnson whispered to Lewis. We need to bypass without alerting their security network. Rather than attempting to neutralize the observation post, which would immediately trigger wider security response, Johnson implemented a technique his grandfather had called shadow passing. The approach involved using natural environmental rhythms to mask movement, timing each progression to coincide with wind gusts through surrounding vegetation, synchronize team movement to distribute noise signature below detection threshold. Over the next 45 minutes, the squad successfully bypassed the observation post without detection, reaching the drainage culvert that passed beneath the German supply route. The concrete tube, approximately 1 meter in diameter, provided both concealment and protection as they traversed the most dangerous segment of their extraction route. Beyond the drainage system, they entered an area of less intensive German security, resources having been concentrated to the northeast, where their final deception suggested American units were attempting to withdraw. By midnight, they had penetrated the outer perimeter of the German security cordon, entering the contested no-man's land between opposing front lines. The final phase of their extraction required traversing approximately 2 kilometers of open terrain, periodically illuminated by German flares and subject to random machine gun fire, standard German practice to discourage infiltration or desertion during nighttime hours. Johnson divided the squad into 2 elements for this final approach, creating greater dispersion to minimize potential casualties from random fire. Each element would proceed independently to the designated extraction point within American lines, where a recognition signal would facilitate safe passage through friendly defenses. The crossing of no man's land proceeded in stages, each advance carefully timed between illumination events and detection risks. By 0200 hours on June 25th, Johnson and Lewis had successfully led their respective elements to within 400 meters of American positions. As they prepared for the final approach to friendly lines, distant explosions illuminated the sky to the east. The commencement of the Allied artillery barrage preceding the offensive, their deception had been designed to facilitate. German defensive positions facing the actual attack corridor, stripped of reinforcements diverted to locate Johnson's phantom reconnaissance, now faced the full weight of Allied advance with significantly reduced capacity. Johnson's squad completed their extraction at 0230 hours, successfully delivering comprehensive intelligence regarding German positions, unit dispositions, and defensive preparations throughout the sector. Beyond this tactical information, they provided invaluable insights into German response protocols, command decision patterns, and security vulnerabilities identified during their extended operation behind enemy lines. The debriefing process lasted approximately 4 hours, with intelligence officers displaying unprecedented interest in both their observations and their methods. For the first time, Johnson found himself specifically questioned about the deception techniques his squad had employed, techniques rooted in cultural knowledge traditionally dismissed by conventional military doctrine. Colonel James Harrison, Division Intelligence Officer, reviewed their report with particular attention to the deception methodology. You managed to convince German command that they were facing a major American reconnaissance operation involving dozens of personnel, possibly with airborne support, he summarized, studying the documented German response. Yet you accomplished this with just 7 men. Johnson maintained professional military bearing during the debriefing, though the validation of their approach was evident. We employed environmental adaptation techniques, sir, creating manufactured evidence calibrated to exploit expected interpretation patterns. These backwards footprints, the colonel continued, indicating the documented technique. That's not standard training. Where did you develop this approach? For the first time, Johnson directly acknowledged the indigenous origins of their methodology. Hunting and evasion techniques passed down through my family, sir, originally developed by my ancestors who escaped enslavement in Louisiana by confounding pursuit through swamplands. The colonel's expression reflected genuine interest rather than dismissal. Knowledge born from necessity, then, and remarkably effective against conventional European tracking doctrine. The conversation marked a subtle but significant shift, formal military acknowledgement of the value inherent in knowledge developed outside traditional Western frameworks. Johnson recognized the moment's importance beyond its immediate tactical context. In the hours that followed, Allied forces launched their offensive along the corridor. Johnson's deception had helped to weaken. German defensive positions, stripped of reinforcements diverted to locate phantom American reconnaissance, proved unable to withstand the concentrated assault. The advance secured approximately 11 kilometers of territory in the first 24 hours, significantly exceeding operational objectives and with casualty rates approximately 60% below projections. The official after-action analysis credited effective preparatory reconnaissance and deception operations for the success, though specific details remained classified. Johnson's squad received commendations for exceptional intelligence gathering under adverse conditions, with no explicit reference to the indigenous techniques that had proven so effective. 3 days after their extraction, as the Allied advance continued to exploit the advantage their deception had created, Captain Miller requested a private conversation with Johnson outside formal reporting channels. Command is establishing a specialized training unit focused on deception operations, Miller informed him without preamble. Your techniques, particularly the backwards footprint method and the phantom presence infrastructure, have attracted significant attention at division level and above. Johnson received this information with characteristic reserve, aware of both the opportunity and potential complications it presented. Those techniques evolved from specific cultural knowledge, sir, not easily systematized into conventional military doctrine. That's precisely why they're so effective, Miller responded. German counterintelligence is trained to detect deception within established military frameworks. Your approach operates outside those parameters, creating false patterns they recognize but cannot properly interpret. The captain hesitated before continuing. There's interest in having you temporarily reassigned to help develop training protocols, formalizing these methods for broader implementation. The proposition represented both recognition and challenge, acknowledgement of the value inherent in Johnson's cultural knowledge, but also the risk of that knowledge being appropriated without proper context or attribution. The complexity of his position, an African-American sergeant being asked to share indigenous techniques with a military institution that maintained rigid racial segregation, was not lost on either man. I'd need my squad assigned with me, Johnson responded after careful consideration. These techniques aren't individual skills, they represent collective knowledge and implementation. Miller nodded, understanding the unstated dimension of Johnson's stipulation. I believe that can be arranged. The results speak for themselves. 3 days of German forces chasing ghosts while we advanced 11 kilometers with minimal resistance. 5 days later, Johnson's squad was temporarily reassigned to a specialized training detachment designated Tactical Deception Development Unit. Their indigenous techniques, particularly the backwards footprint method, were documented, analyzed, and incorporated into expanded deception protocols for implementation by reconnaissance units throughout the European theater. The formal training materials never explicitly acknowledged the cultural origins of these techniques, referring instead to alternative tracking countermeasures and psychological terrain manipulation. Yet among the operational units that implemented these approaches, the informal designation ghost walking remained common parlance, a subtle but persistent recognition of knowledge preserved and transmitted through generations of Americans whose survival had often depended on their ability to confound conventional pursuit. By August 1944, variations of Johnson's techniques had been implemented by American reconnaissance units in multiple theaters of operation, creating what German intelligence assessment described as systematic disorientation through contradictory evidence patterns. The cumulative psychological effect contributed to growing uncertainty within German command regarding American capabilities and intentions, uncertainty that increasingly influenced strategic decision-making as the Allied advance continued. Johnson and his squad returned to regular operational duties in late July, continuing to conduct reconnaissance missions utilizing their specialized techniques. They participated in 5 additional operations before the European conflict concluded, each implementation refining and enhancing their approach based on observed German responses. Their final mission, conducted in April 1945 as Allied forces pushed into German territory, employed a sophisticated evolution of their original backwards footprint technique. The deception infrastructure they established contributed to the surrender of an entire German battle group without resistance. The commanding officer, having become convinced he faced an American force approximately 5 times its actual size. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, the specialized deception techniques pioneered by Johnson's squad were incorporated into classified tactical manuals for potential implementation in the Pacific Theater. Though the conflict's conclusion in August 1945 rendered full deployment unnecessary, the documented methodology continued to influence military deception doctrine throughout the post-war period. Johnson himself received the Bronze Star with Valor device for his contributions, though the citation referenced only exceptional reconnaissance leadership under adverse conditions, rather than the innovative techniques that had proven so effective. Like many African-American servicemen of the era, his most significant contributions remained inadequately recognized within official military history. After demobilization in 1946, Johnson returned to Louisiana, where he eventually became a teacher in segregated schools. He occasionally incorporated subtle lessons drawn from his grandfather's wisdom into his teaching, indigenous knowledge preserved and transmitted to new generations who might never know its historical significance or military application. The backwards footprint technique, that had once confounded an entire German battle group for 3 crucial days, remained primarily within oral tradition, knowledge preserved through stories rather than textbooks, maintained within communities rather than institutions. In 1972, nearly 3 decades after the operation in France, Johnson received an unexpected communication from the Department of Defense. A historical review of classified tactical developments during World War II had identified his squad's innovations as significantly influencing contemporary deception doctrine. The letter requested his participation in a documented interview regarding the methodologies he had employed. Johnson, by then approaching retirement after 26 years of teaching, agreed to the interview with specific conditions. The indigenous origins of the techniques must be explicitly acknowledged, and the contributions of his entire squad recognized equally. The resulting historical documentation finally provided formal recognition of how knowledge preserved through generations of African Americans, techniques developed originally for survival under oppression, had ultimately contributed to military operations that helped secure victory in Europe. Johnson's final recorded statement during the interview encapsulated both the specific tactical achievement and its broader historical significance. When my grandfather taught me to walk backwards through the Louisiana swamps, making footprints that seemed to lead in the opposite direction, he wasn't just passing down hunting techniques. He was preserving knowledge that had helped our family survive when formal institutions offered no protection. That same knowledge, dismissed by conventional military doctrine, ultimately created 3 days of chaos for an enemy that considered themselves superior in every way. There's a lesson in that worth remembering. The backwards footprint technique and its elaborations have since been incorporated into specialized training for reconnaissance and special operations personnel. Though few of those receiving such training recognize its cultural origins, or the remarkable story of how 7 men from a segregated unit once made an entire German battalion chase ghosts for 3 crucial days in the summer of 1944. In military archives, the operation is classified simply as Tactical Deception Implementation, Vosges Sector, June 1944. But among the families of those 7 men, a different history is preserved. The story of how indigenous knowledge passed down through generations proved more effective than conventional military doctrine when implemented by soldiers whose capabilities had been consistently underestimated. That alternate history, preserved through oral tradition rather than official documentation, represents not just a remarkable tactical achievement, but a testament to knowledge maintained outside institutional recognition, waiting for the moment when its value would become undeniable to the very systems that had previously dismissed it. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, Please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.